totally wired. Totally wired.
Welcome to the Rock's Back Pages podcast. I'm Barney Hoskins, and I'm here with my colleagues Mark Pringle.
Hi, Barney.
And Jasper Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
We are in the Rock's Back Pages office with our very special guest, Mr. Paul Gorman.
Hello.
Welcome, Paul.
Hello, how are we?
We are.
The royal we as well. It's really lovely to see you.
It's great to see you.
Paul was actually the first guest on the podcast when we migrated to Zoom in the pandemic.
So the first lockdown guest.
The first lockdown guest. Paul Lockdown Gorman. And so all this time later, however many years that is, right, it's all very nebulous. Hundreds of years later, you were back with us. To
3 governments, 4 countries.
Yes, 18 Charles. You're back with us to talk about your new book, Totally Wired, The Rise and Fall of the Music Press. And we actually launched with you when you were about to publish the precursor to this, In Their Own Right, which I think was subtitled Adventures in the Music Press.
It was, yeah, when the world was young, many, many years ago.
2001.
Yes, by launch you mean the site went live, public in 2001.
It did go, it went live and your book came out. And
so one of my excerpts would have been one of the first pieces that you published.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
So here we are, all this time later, still talking about music journalism.
You'd have thought we'd have got a life in between those days.
No, it's just the biggest stuck record. The biggest stuck record.
Anyway, so we're going to talk about Totally Wired today. We're going to talk about music journalism. We're going to try and keep it to an hour. And how we're going to do that, because it's a vast and sweeping history that starts in the 1920s. Mm-hmm. I suppose one way to start would be to ask you what inspired you to revisit the subject, which you've done as an oral history, and to write a proper narrative version of the history of music journalism.
Well, at that launch party, where Rock's Back Pages was launched, along with In Their Own Right, and also
Jill Furmanovsky's Rock Archive.
Rock Archive. So it was a tripartite launch.
It really was.
It was at a place called Brit Art, a gallery space, I suppose you'd say, run by somebody I knew in Shoreditch High Street. So you can't get any more 2001 than that.
Memory this guy has. Hire this man.
Well, at the launch party, I approached the late Charlie Gillett, who I admired very much and who'd been very helpful with the book, and said, "What do you think of my book? Not your site or Jill's site." And he said, "I don't like it."
That's Charlie.
And so I said, "Why?" And he said, "I don't really like the oral history format. I wanted to hear an overarching kind of authoritative, if that's the right word, narrative drive through this business, rather than people juxtaposed against each other or agreeing with each other." Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my God, he's right. I immediately realised at that party in November...
You made a terrible mistake.
Yeah, it's all been a terrible mistake. And so, ever since then, I wrote several other books in the meantime and did lots of other stuff, but it was always at the back of my mind that this needed addressing. And it was my difficult second book as well. My first book, The Look, which had been about music and fashion, had been quite well received, and launched it in LA and London, and that was great. And I think I got above my skis, as they say in American political circles, in regard to In Their Own Right. I amassed a huge amount of material, but I don't think I treated it in the right way, and I rushed it. So come 2017, when my book about The Face magazine was published,
yes,
I was talking to the head of Thames and Hudson, Sophie Thompson, very, very nice person. She said, "What else have you got?" So I told her about this, and the fact is that In Their Own Right is a great resource for approaching a subject anyway, because I don't think anybody else has been fool enough to write a book about the music press in those 20 years. They certainly hadn't before. But here it all was, ready to be manipulated, maybe some discarded.
You just repurposed all your first book.
Yeah, it took me about 20 minutes and that went to the pub. It actually took a long time, and I chucked out a lot of stuff as well. I kind of, like on one of those desks at a recording studio, I pulled the faders down on some people, and then other people I pushed them up, because I realised that they needed accounting for. At the same time, here was an opportunity to really approach those people from minority or marginalised communities whose work hadn't really been recognised, and the publications that they worked for. I mean, I was kind of insane when it came to In Their Own Right, because I really liked, at that point, Vibe magazine, which was in its pomp. I liked this fanzine run out of LA from the early 90s called Ben Is Dead. I quite like Boyzone, which came out of the terraces and fashion, was into acid house. You know, they were the ones with Get On One Matey, which they drove into the ground. But I loved them because
it's like Terry Farley was
Andrew Weatherall and all those people. I barely gave them a mention in Their Own Right, including as well, I think there's one reference to Collusion magazine, which 5 issues published in the early 80s. That group around Sue Stewart and David Toop and Steve Beresford out of experimental music. And so I thought, well, here's a chance to address Charlie's big problems, but also sort of bring up the microscope on those people as well. And, you know, redress, make amends.
Well, I think you've really done that. I mean,
thank you.
You know, it's such a huge landscape, isn't it? And I love the fact that you wrote about temporary hoarding magazine and so forth, as well as a lot of pretty obscure publications that I loved.
I mean, there's also, 2 or 3 different things sort of happened. I mean, the fanzine culture of punk sort of gave people the idea that you can do a magazine. You've always had a tradition of black music being written by specialist publications, whether it's jazz things or blues and soul and so on and so forth. And I mean, I've been doing a lot with blues and soul recently because David Nathan's just kind of donated a vast kind of swathe of stuff to us.
Great magazine, right?
Absolutely. But it's a direct precursor to the dance music mags of the 90s, right down to the wet T-shirt competitions that we photographed in the inside back, the last 3 pages. You know, I'd never occurred to me before that it was a straight line from blues and soul to jockey slut or music.
Well, quite often in my work, I realise in that praxis where, you know, you do something and then you find out why you did it. Quite often what I do is kind of equalise. I think that jockey slut is as important as the NME. Or Collusion, or Rhythm Records, which was set up in 1928 to appeal to. This was when records and record gramophones were starting. You know, this was a new technology thing, and so there'd be rhythm clubs, which were launched. There were about 100 around the country, and Percy Matheson, who's the editor of Rhythm, says it's kind of peculiar. He actually uses that word, that here are people who've got records, but they listen to them again and again and again in company. You know, they take them to a village hall, or they get people over to their
DJ
front
culture
rooms.
in the making.
You know, there is that thing where that's really just as important as Mixmag, you know, circulating mixtapes in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so I think that, to answer your question, Barney, or your point, Barney, about the kind of the massiveness of the subject, to stop being overwhelmed by it, I had to take these through paths where I could make the links or see if I could make them or not. And sometimes maybe it didn't work, but it was a way through. Otherwise, I'd have just been overwhelmed.
In terms of the historical suite of the book, one of the bits that really jumped out at me was when you mentioned that Chris Hayes was a melody maker with, you know, the famous writers that we've often talked about in the podcast, like Richard Williams and Michael Watts and Chris Welch and so forth. And Chris had joined the Melody Maker in 1929.
I know, it's ridiculous.
He's still there.
Yeah, and ringing up Eric Clapton in the 60s saying, well, look, old boy, but, you know, what kind of plectrum do you use? And stuff like that. Well, can he get out of bed? You know, it's 9:30 in the morning. What's he doing? Yeah. And so that's really extraordinary, isn't it? And it also shows kind of broad church, I think, in a way. I mean, it's very male, white, straight white male, but within that, there were extremely extraordinary people working away, and I think he's a great example of that. And again, here's somebody who goes back to 1929, and I think by the time he was retiring, he was writing, you know, he's probably giving Steve Strange a call, getting him out of bed. Good luck with that, you know. But so here's somebody who'd kind of gone through the broad swathe of the music press, really.
Yeah. I mean, one of the, I suppose, tropes about anyone who's interested in a sort of inside baseball way about music journalism, is this sort of slightly false binary opposition between popular, just like poppy writing, right, and when the first rock critics emerged, and I never see it as being completely binary, but maybe a question I would have is, when do you think the first good, serious writing about popular music was published?
Well, I think you go back to 1926.
Right.
The first issue of The Melody Maker is an extraordinary document. It's 36 pages, and it raises issues around identity, race, authenticity, and it actually approaches them. I mean, there are some articles, I remember I interviewed John Pidgeon, he was hooting about this, there's an article about the place of the banjo in the modern orchestra. But there are other articles where they argue about hot jazz, which was played by the African-American originals, and we're only, 10 years into that?
Sure,
only 26, maybe 50, I don't know the exact chronology. And then it's not as good as syncopated jazz or orchestral jazz, which is the lukewarm, white, European version of it, which is quite novelty. But there are those tensions already there.
That's fascinating.
And
really
so
interesting.
they kind of, if you follow that path as well, you get to somebody like, Max Jones in the 40s, actually, at Melody Maker, the permanently wearing beret and dark glasses wearing. Such a good idea, wasn't it? Because you could almost draw him.
Yeah. And a way of making his alopecia hip.
Yes, there you go. Always a good thing.
Always a good thing.
I'm going to get a T-shirt with that someday. But then you get Gloria Stavers at 16 magazine, who understands that, 16 was launched on the back of some filched photos of Elvis by these middle-aged blokes and a crooked guy whose name escapes me now. Luckily he's dead, so I can say that. They employed the glamorous Gloria Stavers as a secretary and to open the post, because there were just bags of post to this 16 magazine from all over the US, from young girls, mainly young girls. And she realised, being a woman as well, that here was the key to young female desires in popular culture as well. And rather than exploit it, she kind of met it halfway. And so she came up with the lingo. Photos were pics, issue was ish. There's all that stuff that goes on. And, they gave her the budget to buy a decent camera. And so she took photos of these stars who were fairly sort of sub-Elvis. They weren't rock and rollers, really. They were pop artists. And she'd asked for baby pics and favourites. But what she was doing, and Dave Marsh says this in the book, was really forming the basis of what became known as rock criticism. So I think she's a very important person and much overlooked because of her sex, basically, as is Ellen Willis, who I think is really the first recognisable proper writer about music, and your responses to it, or one's responses to it.
And that was in the New Yorker.
That was in the New Yorker, and that was selling 500,000 copies an issue. Yeah. So she's going out there. And also Lillian Roxon, as well, the Australian.
I mean, I am, as everyone listens to this podcast knows, I'm a complete fanboy of Maureen Cleave in the Evening Standard. And she's a sensational writer, doing really interesting interviews. I mean, it's not rock criticism in inverse commas. I mean, she'll do a little possible review of a single or an album, but this is basically the interview. I think she stands head and shoulders above most rock interviewers right up to the present day. Yeah. The woman who got John Lennon to say that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. Right. And also just great writing. I mean, later on when we go through what's new in the library, I've got a fantastic quote. Her writing about Marianne Faithfull in 1964. So yes, interesting that you should raise the fact that women writers were central to this process.
I'm wondering now whether it was ever thus. If you think about the current crop of great writers about music, you have to think about Kate Mossman, or, for me, Kitty Empire, or Laura Barton, or I'm going to forget some now, and they'll have a go at me.
Well, Sylvia Patterson, she's that much.
Jude Rogers, Sean
Patterson.
Exactly. Terrific.
And maybe it was ever thus, because I see a line between them and also Penny Valentine and Disc here, and then later at Streetlife. Her articles about misogyny in the music industry in 1975 in Streetlife are mandatory reading. And they also, for a reader at the time, I was 15, And so, Street Life was quite an interesting proposition, wasn't it? It wasn't quite successful, but it kind of ripped the Band-Aid off the music industry and indeed the music press.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so she was prepared. Val Wilmer,
Yes.
think about the sterling
Caroline
work
Coon.
that she did. Caroline Coon.
I mean, you
is
write
really
about
important.
Caroline Coon and the resistance she encountered
incredible,
at
isn't it?
Melody Maker.
Yeah.
I
when
noticed-
she was championing punk, she wanted to write about punk, and the sort of relatively old guard of
Yeah, but I
guys.
noticed that Michael Watts said, hey, look, we treated her really badly. But when she talks about going into the office, and this is pre-punk, when she was writing about great pieces about the Bay City Rollers and David Cassidy, which
great
none
pieces.
of the other papers were
Right.
really
Touch,
addressing,
no.
apart from taking the piss. That's what they would do. Is that if they wrote about those bands, who, after all, were selling vast amounts of records and tapping into some kind of something. She was going into the office and she'd just get catcalls, jeering, every time she went into the office.
Valerie
Incredible.
Wilmer is pretty withering about the misogynistic culture of Melody Maker, and she started writing Melody Maker, 67, 68, around
I
then?
think a bit earlier.
Maybe a bit
actually.
earlier, and she said it was just like that then,
Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair to the music press, I mean, we're talking about the certain of big titles, but people like Record Mirror were writing about those pop groups very favourably because they regard themselves as pop papers.
Yeah.
They weren't like the rock press.
That's true.
I think one of the interesting things there is that when you think about pop, you're thinking about a whole wider cultural phenomenon, and you're writing not just about the music. You're not just asking, well, what plectrum do you use, or which amp are you playing through, or whatever. And you're talking about people's lives, and you're going back to those gathering baby pictures. That's to bring someone a whole picture of a celebrity, of a pop star, of a musician, that doesn't just kind of make it very dryly about the music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it talks about the culture around music,
exactly.
doesn't it?
But it's also the beginnings of what we'd now regard as kind of celeb culture.
Yeah. These were our celebrities, weren't
Yes.
they? I mean, if you think about the Enemy in the 70s, and actually, probably, I don't know, by 77, maybe 78, maybe a bit earlier, the 5 weekly music papers were selling close to 1 million copies a week.
Yeah.
That's a lot of kids and a lot of information you're being turned on to. And also, you'd find out about, I mean, for me, being completely surface animal, Mick Jagger was wearing a pair of trainers on the tour. I'm thinking, wow, that was a big move then for somebody like that to be wearing. And so that was our gossip. The Thrills column would be full of stuff which would now be on the front pages of, if they still exist, the tabloids. Or
I think in this connection, it's worth going back to 1966 and Paul Williams launching Crawdaddy, Greg Shaw with Mojo Navigator Rock and Roll News, and the fact they were a pair of fanboys who'd been influenced by sci-fi fanzines and so forth, and it was very, very male, quite geeky, quite sort of studenty appreciations of what they deemed to be these new artists. It's not only just pop groups. The Beatles and Brian Wilson were, heavyweight talents, which I would have agreed with. What's interesting in terms of you talking about Mick Jagger's pants or whatever you
trainers,
about.
but we can talk about his pants.
Well, Jan Wenner, canny fucker that he is, grills both Paul Williams and Greg Shaw. And what he realises is that the 60s, quote unquote, is becoming a business. It's becoming an industry.
Yeah.
So he sees what they've done, and it's like mimeograph fanzines, it's very low level thing. But he can see that there's an opportunity to create a serious magazine which is about the culture, about the personalities, the lifestyle, dope, protest, politics, everything. And it's genius. The timing of it is
it's one of the greatest publishers ever, right? But it all falls into place for him when he visits London and visits the offices of Melody Maker.
Yes.
He's given an intro to Max Jones.
Yes.
Who we might think of as one of the big stars of the music, one of the first big stars of the music press, by Ralph Gleason, his mentor. And he gets there, and I think he tries to pitch a review. Maybe it was published, maybe it wasn't. But he comes back to San Francisco and says, there is this magazine which is embedded in music, but it's got rigour to it. So this is a bunch of early middle-aged blokes tapping away, thrashing away on heavy typewriters, sleeves rolled up, knocking it out every week. and he sees how if you apply that rigour to the counterculture, it's not messy or fanzine-y, you're onto a winner, and of course he is.
I mean, in a sense, which is the cart, which is the horse, because I think what required that, and we're talking about criticism here rather than just music writing, and the idea of the review, is the fact that suddenly people started making albums which demanded that degree of sophistication in the way in which they were criticised and written about, which is fine, as long as everyone's producing a Sgt. Pepper's or a Pet Sounds. The trouble with that is that then you apply that degree of criticism to the great swathes of frankly awful rock and roll music that came out subsequently, and it breaks down, and suddenly actually you want to read about the people again and not some bloke's review of Split by the Groundhogs, which I happen to think is a rather good album, but you know
that's another episode, folks.
But you know, I really resist this notion that rock and roll journalism was invented in 1966-67 by American men. I just hate it because I think it's just wrong.
But don't you also think that the rock criticism didn't really stand up to scrutiny as much as the music that was being made? I try and go back to those pieces, and maybe I just haven't got the attention span I had then. I just get very tired. I find them very tiresome.
Yeah.
I won't name them. Some of them are still around. They're really,
they're
really are
stodgy.
rather pleased with themselves still. And you look back at the stuff and you go, this does not bear scrutiny.
Yeah.
You go back to Ellen Willis's articles. Hell, it's all there.
No,
some of her contemporaries in the males are just like, wow, this is incredible this ever got published. And I began to realise this very early on, because I left school and home when I was very young and started as a hack, proper hack, when I was 18, 2 years before The Face was launched.
Right.
And so I was already working in a, very boring, it was fun, a trade paper, and I could see through the journalism.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just me as by then trained journalist, it was me as a punter as well. And one of the things that emerged for me, it's funny how your perspective changes over time. I went back to some of those enemies which I kind of celebrated in 2001 in Their Own Right. Damn, some of those articles really don't stand up. Apart from the casual sexism, racism and homophobia,
Sure.
But I mean, what's interesting, smash hits in The Face pretty much open more or less the same time, don't they? They launch
2 years.
Almost, yes.
By the same person.
What do? They got rid of reviews almost entirely.
Yeah.
You get a tiny capsule reviews here and there. At the back of The Face's book, there'll be a sort of handful of things. But they basically get rid of the review and they start talking about the people.
Which is what we all want to know.
Which is what we all want to know.
All the time, all the way along since Maureen Cleave.
Which is what Maureen Cleave was doing in 1964
I agree.
in Evening Standard.
And so it was a way of pulling the rug from under those people. And of course they weren't very happy. Lester Bangs wrote this piece about The Clash. It was in 3 parts.
That's awful.
One of the less good things.
And I remember trying to read it as a 17-year-old and fan of The Clash at the time, and it was just a waste of time. And so you could see the culture was moving on, they'd had their moments, and it was over, and really you could see that the Emperor had no clothes.
And it's interesting that's where Rolling Stone becomes a more and more difficult magazine to write. Yes, with some fantastic interviews and features, but the primacy of the album review just staggered on 3.5 stars.
Right.
Everything has 3.5 stars.
Because it's all 3.5 star material.
It's 3.5 star material.
I mean, if we go back to the theme of sort of sexism and misogyny and how few female writers, let alone black writers, were able to break into the club, right? One of the pieces that we're featuring on the homepage is this. It's from 1973. There's this California magazine called Coast, which was like a lifestyle magazine. And the cover of this April 73 issue is the headline is Rock Critics Rule. And inside, they talk to 27 American rock critics about how they see the state of music. And it's Lester Bangs, it's Richard Milton, it's the usual suspects.
Isn't that the year they all got together for the Rock Crits
It
convention?
is, precisely.
They must have done it there or something, because they're all in the same place. So not a woman or a person of colour among them.
Although the intro claims that 3 women
responded
responded to the request. They were all sent these questions, and 3 women responded, but I can only see one woman, Nancy Erdich, in the...
Right.
The rest is like a sort of gallery of noise boys and irreverent alcoholics, basically.
Such a charming combo.
We're also featuring this hilarious piece called How to Be a Rock Critic, which was put together by a woman called Deanne Stillman, who came on board a couple of years ago, and she assembles all these quotes. It was this sort of 7 easy lessons on how to be a rock critic. It's quite amusing, so we've added that as well. I mean, I was very interested in what you said about the first issue of Melody Maker and the sort of the theme of intellectual snobbery, which in a sense is what we're discussing. And to jump forward, you know, quite radically from 1926 or whatever it was, you address this moment when Nick Logan, who you did the story of the Facebook with, moves across the road to the Smash Hits office. And I was working in the NME office, not in 78 or 9, whatever that was. But I remember Smash Hits. We could look down and peer into the Smash Hits offices.
Didn't Neil Tennant? Didn't they put up their circulation
figures
stuck into the window?
I don't remember. That was probably before I joined. But I do remember that sort of turning point.
Right.
You know that we were on the tide going out, and this was the tide that was coming in.
Yeah.
And I suppose the sort of the NME had sort of, in some respects, disappeared up its own arse in terms of, the obscurantism of its references and the Morley and Penman era. And it's ironic that Nick Logan, who brought in all those wild writers, kind of basically tipped them out the kind of back door.
He understood. He understands pop. No, he understands pop. Pop is action reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Pop is straight trousers and flares.
Yes.
Pop is long hair and skinhead.
Yes.
So he understands the pop process in a publishing context.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a cultural context.
Absolutely, exactly. Because he's an old mod, so he's totally into visual culture. And so I think that it gave him great joy as well to pull the rug from under the NME, because he never felt like he'd been valued there. He was paid a pittance to handle these maniacs, which he brought on board, which was selling, enormous amounts of ads and, copies for him. But I think that also the conversation went elsewhere, and he's ever the zeitgeist rider.
Yeah.
And so by 81, I happen to think that Paul Morley and Ian Penman are the last great blast of inky music journalism. I thought the way that they operated in terms of, they were saying, look, you can call us pretentious, but what we're trying to do is strive a new way forward. Sometimes it worked because it reflected the ways in which rock music in particular was trying to move forward. And so I think, as you say, the tide was leaving the NME behind. And Smash Hits, it was time for Smash Hits as well. It was time for the face. And if you look at Smash Hits in the 80s, I mean, it's a pretty damn good magazine.
Yeah, it's great.
I would say it's probably one of the best.
But the whole thing is more
music
complex
papers of all time.
anyway than it might appear to be, because of course Paul Morley was writing about what he called new pop. In the NME. I mean, he was the one who got Kim Wilde on the cover.
Dollar.
And Dollar. And then, of course, ZTT and Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So it's hardly as if Paul was some sort of reactionary looking down on Smash Hits, but he was just doing it in a different way.
But I think they had to shoulder the blame, didn't they, when it all started to go bandy for the NME.
I have said this before, my idea of hell is a 3,000-word Ian Penman interview with Green from Scritti Politique, because I will not understand a single word they're saying.
Right.
Unless you've got a degree in French literature, philosophy.
Did either of them have those?
No, of course not.
but for me, it was kind of quixotic.
Right.
So I quite enjoyed it. But then by 81, I was reading The Face. I was reading Smash Hits if I wanted to know about pop. And so I think that this story is about that action reaction as well. And so we go from Rolling Stone to Sniffing Glue, or temporary hoarding, which isn't even stapled, is it? It's just one big thing you stick on the wall as a poster.
Yeah.
And so, and that kind of, exactly. That responds to and also drives popular music and popular culture. So I think that's where it's a really great thing to study, because it's such a weather vane.
Yes. You talk in the book about, just jumping off from what we've been talking about, the birthday party. There's a hilarious, I think, sort of, because I wrote about the birthday party, and so did Matt Snow and others, and there was a sort of sense of, well, we hate all this kind of video synth pop. It's so fluffy and pointless and
inauthentic.
Well, I don't think I used that word, but I mean
that's the word, though, isn't it?
In a sense, Nick Cave represented the sort of last gasp of, that very self-destructive, charismatic,
leather trouser wearing,
Nietzschean, heroin fueled, right, just like we're riding the train to hell here, and I got caught up in that, and so I think you have like Paolo Hewitt or someone saying, in a very snooty way, Barney thinks that we were pissed off about the birthday party. We weren't even thinking about the birthday party. And there's a lot of truth to that, of course. But Nick Cave, nonetheless, was a he's still a huge star. I mean, he has, unlike a lot of those 80s acts, he's still recognised as a sort of major artist. I wanted to touch on the subject of the sort of hostility between artists and journalists. And in the light of that, some listeners will know about the notorious song Scum that Nick Cave wrote about music journalists.
About Matt Snow. And
so we're just going to hear this. I had forgotten that there's this audio interview we have on Punk's Back Pages from 1986. Well, I'm just going to play it because it is really rather extraordinary. And then we'll talk about the mutual loathing between journalists.
See, here are a whole lot of scums. There's one. This is about you. You. No, let's forget that. This is about you. This is a recorded one, I think. I mean, this is just a kind of a pastime. I mean, I write really well. I write really hate lyrics really well. And really nasty lyrics really well, and it's not every day you can kind of use them, really. There's another one. This actually, but this is only, this particular, just back onto that subject, this particular song was when you're in the studio, you don't just go in there with your 10 songs and record them. You work on various things, and a bit of cheap, kind of aggressive filth music came up, and that seemed to be the kind of vehicle for these lyrics or so.
Can I have a look at the one about me?
No.
Why not?
Because there's only certain of the lyrics that I've chosen to sort of sing. And in this particular book, I indulge myself to the limits. I don't have any problems about a journalist looking inside this or whatever. I just, I don't have to show this to anyone. I can write whatever I like in this book.
Scum. Well, you're on the shit list. Thrust and twist and screw. You gave me a bad review, and maybe you think that it's all.
Well, it's an extraordinary moment. I mean,
can I have a look?
Yes, Matt, his genial self, like quite amused by this. But this song has become sort of notorious, and I don't know what the rest.
Antonella Black as well.
It's about Antonella Black, exactly. What I don't, I always sort of think. In a sense, how sad to be writing fucking songs about music.
It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic.
I don't know. I think it's quite.
You
funny.
quite like it?
Yeah, I do, because I think what Cave identified there was that music journalists can be above themselves, and when you're a musician, there is that very difficult thing that it's a kind of symbiotic relationship, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You're locked into this dance of death in a way that at one point, one or the other is going to overcome it. And Matt actually told me that he kind of provoked that by writing in a review, I've heard the new Nick Cave record. This one by Blixer Bargeld is far better. So he was already engaging in one-upmanship. And so here's Cave responding with his
Which
grow
I
into the game.
I find really pathetic. I have
You
to
do?
say.
But it's as thin-skinned as Donald Trump in a way.
exactly.
Isn't it? Somebody just saying somebody else's, they prefer someone else's record to yours.
These are pop stars. You know, what do you expect?
No,
What about
Well,
Dylan attacking Max Jones in Ballad of
Sure,
a Thin Man?
Ballad of a Thin Man.
So
It's-
is that thin-skinned?
Yeah.
Yes, of course it is.
And the great story of Dylan being thrown out of the Melody Maker offices.
Yes, exactly, because they were on press day, weren't they? And
Yeah.
he was a nobody.
1962,
was a
Dylan comes.
nobody.
He wants to meet Max.
Max Jones again.
And
yeah.
rereading your book, I read it was Bob Dorbarn who actually threw Bob
Yeah.
out because no one knew Bob was. He's
No.
a skinny fucking runt.
And
from
Dylan
Village.
introduced the song in Japan in, I don't know, the 80s, relatively recently, maybe the 90s, by going on about this was about a guy who asked me too many questions.
But it still happens, right? That like musicians now, and I don't want to get this wrong, but I think it was Lizzo who at one point tweeted about some review that she'd received, being like, "How can you write all this stuff? You don't know what goes into my art and this
Yeah.
and that." And I think there is a kind of sense of.
Do you think that's valid?
Well, I
think
don't.
it's valid.
I don't know whether I think it's
grow
valid.
up.
I think there's a kind of element to which musicians feel like they're doing something that is sincere and bearing their soul and all
Right.
this stuff, and then it's kind of thrown out to the jackals to sort of tear it apart.
Right.
And there's a kind of
Get
sense in
over
which
yourselves.
music journalism, I can imagine, would feel a bit like people are just trying to profit out of you rather
It's
than
a perfect
for-
storm of idiocy on both sides. You've got, music journalists who are far too smug and pleased with what they bloody do, writing about musicians who are far too pleased and smug about what they do. Frankly, they can all go fuck themselves.
But we wouldn't have, I don't know, it adds to the kind of...
Gaiety of...
Yeah, the gaiety of life and the music press. But also, what it does do is attest to the power of music journalists at a certain point.
Well-
if Cave wasn't worried, concerned, or affected by whatever Matt Snow was going to write, he wouldn't have written it. He'd have gone, I don't really give him
Yeah, but
monkeys."
I think that power's always been mythical. I don't think that power ever existed in the way that either musicians or music
But
journalists like to think it
certain
does.
musicians perceived it, whether
Right,
it actually
okay.
existed or not. And I think that still goes on. I mean, there were big rows at Vibe over their star system. And I
Right.
think, I can't remember who the act was, but they gave them 4 stars rather than 5. And it eventuated in physical threats, you know. So it continues to this day, as you say. Lizzo's on Twitter having a go. I think it's fair game, actually. As a hack, you've got to expect it.
And there are lots of
Not death
songs.
threats, necessarily.
There are lots of songs about music critics, aren't there? I
Yeah.
mean, when you sit down and start to think about it, I mean, like that, I mean, just off the top of my head, the Prince song, All the Critics Love You in New York.
Right.
You mentioned in that section where you write about the underground mags and fanzines, particularly American ones, you mentioned that Ben is Dead and so forth. You mentioned that Sonic Youth song, which I'm going to ask you to recite the title.
God, it's a tongue twister.
I killed
Chris
Chris
Gow with my big fucking dick.
That's the one. That's the ditty in
Which
question.
was circulated, I think it was a flexi.
I think it was a
basically,
flexi disc on
with Forced Exposure. Which was
Yes.
a great magazine. I don't
Yes.
know if you've got any
No,
copies
no,
here,
yeah.
but a really good magazine.
yeah.
And so this was a response to Robert Christgau's, what does he call himself? The Pope?
Dean
Dean of Rock Critics.
yeah.
Dean of American Rock Critics.
Come on, you're setting yourself up there, mate, for
Yeah, sure.
a bit of a...
Believe me, I can very happily
Yeah.
be part of the,
But it's funny
shooting
as
them
well.
down.
For me, it's quite funny to see these people indulge in these kind of very petty, I accept, spats. But as I say, it adds to the flavour a bit. But I think The Fall recorded a song as recently as 2010 about a journalist from Uncut who'd accused... And having written the book, I can't remember a bloody thing about it, but he'd accused Marky Smith of some particular kind of pretty ineffectual activity, and Marky Smith had got his nose out of joint over that. So
Yeah.
it continues to this
Yeah.
day.
I
And
mean, it's even-
for me,
Mind
long may
you,
it
the Fall
continue.
hated everyone. You've got to
That's
be
true.
fair about
Yeah.
it.
I mean, a more genial sort of example is Garden Party by Rick Nelson.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
which
did
is
not know
a
that.
dig at critics who were attacking him for
That show,
not
Madison-
just being like a rock and roll revival.
Madison Square Garden, yeah.
yeah.
That big the gap being the garden.
Because he was
party.
writing new songs in a kind of country rock vein,
Yeah.
and these old guard critics thought he should just be singing, Hello, Mary Lou.
Yeah.
And so all of this, I think, underlines the perceived power, if it wasn't actual power, of the music press, because these were magazines that were selling in their hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Rolling Stone, Vibe in the 90s, and now what has happened, it's really the through line of my book, is that what was once a mass activity, both in terms of consumption and production, is now a niche activity.
Yes.
And so the circulations have shrunk of print, but also the attentiveness to online outlets is really quite small. Or is it fragmented? It's very difficult to say. But this was something that 1 million copies of the Inkies were selling in the 70s.
Yeah.
A lot of kids, a lot of pass on. There's a lot of people turning on to information, some of which would be vanguard. But there are various reasons for that, and I hope I elucidate them in the book.
You wanna press Chris down? Let that shit die and find out the new dawn.
And then there's things like, how do you write about music, which is simply very hard to write about, and specifically dance culture, where the artist didn't vanish, but really went into the background.
Yeah.
And so you've got this whole rash of magazines appeared in the late 80s, well, 90s particularly in this country, Music, Mix Mag, Jockey Slut and so on.
Mix Mag was a great magazine, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they're trying to write about something which is actually really hard to write about.
Well, no, I think that they took up the baton from The Face in particular.
Yeah.
And with The Face, Nick Logan made a statement that popular music is much more than just music. It's about the culture that surrounds it. It's lifestyle.
Yeah.
We can encapsulate in that. And that's why some of the dance magazines, for me, were really successful. Because they encapsulated the lifestyle.
Yeah, they wrote about the drugs. They wrote about all of that sort of side. But it is very, nonetheless, to write about, you can interview a certain handful of people. So, very interesting going through Mix Mag, for example. You're much more likely to get an interview with a hip-hop artist than you are with DJs, because a hip-hop artist is an artist, inverted commas, who represents as a person the music he's making and vice versa. DJ interviews are inherently deeply unsatisfactory things. So it's curious, you get this magazine where there's the big interviews with a hip-hop artist, or a DJ who's just got an ego as big as Van Buren's, for example, Van Helder, you get something like that. And then the rest of it's sort of club reports and photographs of women, blurred street flashlit pictures of women not wearing much in the way of clothing. I find the dance music publication stuff very... because I became a very late stage raven, so I became fascinated by the stuff. And you obviously are much keener on those publications than I am.
Right.
I struggle with them because
but that's because you're used to the music press being in some way
about people,
a traditional. Well, I'd say that.
Well, about artists.
But if the music press, it depends how you define it to yourself. And one of the ways you can define it is in communicating music in all of its forms. And I think the dance music titles, music press titles of their day communicated the joy, the abandon, the lifestyle, as much as somebody reviewing the Pink Fairies for the NME in 1974.
I
see equivalence. You see, that's really my thing, is to try and draw equivalence.
Right.
I hope where it exists rather than where it doesn't exist.
What you're saying about fragmentation and niches, I think kind of in parallel with that, what we have to recognise is that I would say in the 80s, the big iconic pop and rock and soul acts you would only have been able to read about in the weeklies or Rolling Stone or Cream. By the end of the 80s, you could read about them everywhere. And they were everywhere. They were just part of the cultural wallpaper.
Yes.
And
so we're talking Madonna, U2, Prince, whatever.
We're
Michael.
Talking about the dawn of celebrity culture, where when you read the NME as a sort of schoolboy, you felt like you had some ownership of, even like the Rolling Stones. I mean, when I went to see the Stones at Earl's Court in '76, it still felt like you were part of some kind of underground tribe in some ways, even though Mick was a superstar. But I would say by the end of the 80s, all of these stars had absolutely become household
I
names.
think it's really beginning there, and it's John Blake who's the very clever person
Right.
who understood
the Sun's pop correspondent.
that he could take from the pages of the enemy. And so George O'Dowd's Problems in 86, 87 then
Yes.
become front page news.
They become everyday gossip.
So we're heading towards that, but really for me it's Britpop where it kind of goes out of national, and it's kind of the end of it as well.
Right.
It's the death
And that's
knell.
the Lab Mags. That's the Loaded as well.
Well,
Very much part of.
well,
was
it's
talking
select.
about- I was talking
you
about-
make this point very well in the book that Britpop almost killed the UK music press.
I think it did, because it was the information was about these people was available everywhere, but it was actually in the main.
They were on the front cover of the tabloids. The
It was
Blurby
in
Oasis.
national media,
Yes.
and so the arguments over the release of Country House and Roll With It, or whatever the single was, is the lead item on the news at 10.
Yes.
And everybody from, as somebody says in the book, Alan Jones, I think, everybody from Angling News to Motorcycle Rider had their Oasis story.
Yes.
And so why buy the music press?
Quite.
Simultaneously, the enemy launches its website and it's free. And so why are you going to buy a magazine?
I was about to say that there's something else at play when it comes to the internet that causes part of what we now have, which is there are still music publications, there are still online music publications, but two things happen, which is that A, it becomes much easier for anybody to talk about music in the way that previously only music critics were given a platform to talk about music. When we think about blogs, we think about video reviews that people now put on YouTube. I would say that I've probably said this before on the podcast, but the most well-known music critic online is a guy called Anthony Fantano, who makes video reviews and he's really reviewing albums, but he's doing it in form of video rather than in form of writing, and he gets a much bigger audience than anybody writing for Rolling Stone or
How big's his
wherever else.
audience? Do you know? Millions?
It's millions, yeah.
Right, okay.
And then there's this other
aren't we
factor, which
doing
is that it's much easier for artists now to talk directly to their fans.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need to go and read an interview with Lizzo or Billie Eilish or Drake when you can go on their Instagram or their TikTok and watch them talk to you directly.
Well, a really good example. My girlfriend's 14-year-old daughter. Minecraft is her thing, and there's this band called Lovejoy, who are a bunch of sort of gap year chaps, from the south coast, and that's how they promote themselves, effectively through Minecraft. So it's not for us, that's for sure.
Well,
which in itself is interesting. I like the fact.
I
it's
would
not
say
for us.
that just as song sheets went to records, in the 30s, so this is just a change of delivery format. And so.
And very tightly targeted at a very specific audience.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
so access, and it's kind of egalitarian, which I really like as well.
But also
And so
exclusive.
There is no longer the dean
Yes.
of rock criticism. It's for fucking
But it's
everybody.
also, but it's not for us. It isn't for
and
everybody.
it depends on whether you want to.
With the nature of the internet means it's a lot of different salami slices, which can be put onto various different platforms and directed very specifically at the people whom you want to direct it. Not their parents, not their mum and dad, but you.
Well, we're all niche creatures, aren't we?
But what that also means is that feeling, Barney, that you were talking about of being part of a club, of buying the NME, that hasn't been lost.
No,
That still
absolutely.
exists.
No,
And
no.
even when you think about the biggest pop stars in the world, groups like BTS, K-pop stuff, their fans really see themselves as being a part of almost like a movement, of like a fan group that crosses country borders, crosses cultural borders, and it's really important.
Yes, but
in a personal
doesn't
sense.
really cross age group borders, and I think this is really important. Is that there is a worldwide audience of people between 13 and 16, for example. That the chances of these children's parents being interested in what these bands are doing is frankly minimal.
But aren't we going back to the 50s and early 60s? I mean, McLaren said, his avowed intent, one of his avowed intents with the Sex Pistols was to create a generation gap.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that the power of popular music resides with young people, and it's
It
for
always
young
has.
people. And so there we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any.
In that
change in it.
2002 piece we were talking about earlier, which we're featuring on the homepage, which is, I think some of this material is in Totally Wired.
Right.
You quote a fellow called Alfie Lewis, who I think is the publisher of Top of the Pops magazine.
That's right, yeah.
Alfie Lewis. And he talks about there are so many external factors competing with CD sales and so forth. And any kid who was going to spend money elsewhere, like getting a mobile phone, has got that now. Now, this is 2002. And so, you know, when we think about our youth, and you'd go and buy this magazine or that magazine, and you'd spend money on, whatever, as a consumer, as a fan, as someone in the tribe. You know, now, you know, all this time later, everything is like condensed down into this single device you carry around. Everything is there, and your attention is so scattered, you know, that there's no one place you're going to for information.
I'm not sure I agree with that. So I think that people find their places like we found our magazines.
There are some places, yes, but it isn't like the NME.
Well, it's their version of it.
But what is it? Tell me what it is.
It's very different from anything
Well, it'll be like,
to.
you know, in some cases it might be a subreddit about an artist, it might be a TikTok account, it could even be a fan account that people follow, fans of an artist follow another fan who curates a set of content, videos, pictures.
The method is entirely different, but actually I think what you're saying, and I think that Jasper and I agree, is that it's the same sort of degree of concentration of this is where my stuff is. This is where
I think it's more diffuse. I think it's more diffuse. That's all I would say. It's not quite so monocultural.
Maybe, but I think that the intensity and the passion and the feeling that you get from it is very much the same.
Absolutely.
And I think
I don't dispute that.
I'm not really sure the method of delivery matters that much, except in the sense that, you know, it's meant that most print pop magazines have died. It's just because they couldn't move on with the changes in technology. It's not a format that really carries that much weight any longer for various reasons.
The way that people consume music is very different now.
Yes.
And so the way in which people consume it and the music itself become deeply related to one another. It's very much hard to describe in the way that we can describe the music press. You know, because it's just, as you say, it's a million different things. But if you're part of that scene, it's every bit as much sort of, you know, as about you and about your tribe and all of the same sort of things.
And you don't
rock and roll's always been about.
It's an interesting point you just made. Is the way we listen to music has changed. You don't need a record review any longer if you can just go and listen to the record for nothing immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it comes down to, in the end, I mean, it is a generational thing, and maybe it comes down to, do you actually care about reading, particularly sort of long form writing, whether it's critical writing or biographical writing?
Do you need to? Did we ever
it's
need
not about,
to?
It's not about, to me, it's about, do you enjoy it? I mean,
I think there is a lot of that material out there. You know, if you think about what Kate Mossman does at the New Statesman, you know, I keep on saying this, the best bit of music journalism, by which I mean the one which left its greatest impact on me, was Ian Penman writing about Solange Knowles in the LRB.
Yes.
I think in January or maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
And so it's still there. That stuff is still there. What's the Oxford... I know this person, Elizabeth Nelson, who writes for an American...
the Oxford American?
The
Oxford American.
Yeah, great pieces in there.
So it's still there if you want it. What I was going to say about the interesting thing for me is that the technology is often in lockstep or driving what's happening in music. And so you've got funk now through TikTok, PHONK, which is mishmashing, you know, songs from the past which pop up to a generation which have never heard them before. And they start creating music for that format in the same way that the single... It's difficult to tell. The single then dominated songwriters to write 3-minute songs.
Yes.
Or the album then made sure that people made
substantial pieces of coherent and comprehensive work, or so they hoped.
And so I, that's the really interesting thing for me, but that's slightly outside of what we understand as the music press.
I just think it's dangerous to be nostalgic.
Yeah.
In a way.
Absolutely.
I mean, so, as the paradox says, that all of our business...
Am I not allowed to be
you're absolutely not, Barney. I mean, the irony is that Rock's Back Pages is very much about... but actually it isn't. What we're about is about showing what people were saying at that time about
and how they were delivering it.
And how exactly. Yeah. So it isn't an exercise in nostalgia. It's what I believe it's... What do the academics call it?
Retromania.
No.
Reception studies.
Reception studies.
Reception studies.
You know, but it's not an exercise in nostalgia. I just don't feel nostalgic.
But
about some sort
I
of
felt
rock and roll past
I felt
of mine.
like I felt a bit evangelistic, and I think that's what happens when you write books: is you want to present information that isn't out there before. And so, it was important for me really to talk about black music and Carl Gale. Because
I'm really
you read
glad
his stuff,
you
and
talked about
you've
Carl
got
Gale.
some of his
No,
articles.
we haven't.
No, we
and we
haven't.
would love
Wish
to
we
get
did.
Carl
But
Gale.
he's
I don't
still
know where
with
he
us.
is.
He's in Jamaica.
He is due. Oh, well, we'll have a separate conversation.
But it was important
You've
for
got his
me.
email
Come on,
address.
let's do some
Talking about
business
that.
here.
It was important for me to kind of say, this is really great music journalism, written at the same time as the so-called golden age, from 73 to 78 or whenever he was writing, at the same time as talking about Ben is Dead in America. I wanted to to avoid that nostalgic trap by saying to people who would know The Enemy and Melody Maker and Time Out, maybe we haven't talked about Time Out, but put them in the context of these other magazines which were very active, which didn't last very long sometimes. They were beautiful little episodes in publishing about music, and so I wanted to create a whole out of it which wasn't nostalgia.
Writing history isn't an exercise in nostalgia.
Exactly.
It's about writing history.
That's what I wanted to do,
Yes.
and my problem with a lot of present company accepted, of course, with a lot of music books is that for a start they're not journalistic enough, and as a trained hack, that kind of prickles. But also they are largely exercises in nostalgia. In it was great then, it's not so great now.
Do you think, and this is possibly a slightly funny thing to ask, you having written a book called The Rise and Fall of the Music Press, do you think that there ever was or is any such one thing as the music press?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult because it's one of those things you think, oh yeah, I know what that is. And once you put it under the microscope, it starts wriggling around. You go, oh, wait a minute. Was it Time Out, the early issues? That would have been, or was that Underground Press? Was Friends in its various variations? The music, of course it was. Nick Kent, Penny Smith worked there.
Exactly.
They were, covering, they were music journalists in their way. So it is a difficult thing to pin down even still.
I'm so glad you mentioned Time Out.
Right.
Because it's the perfect segue to the week's new audio interview. Mark, who is it?
Yeah, it says Tony Elliott, the founder, proprietor of Time Out. Interviewed by Frank Broughton in 1998. So he starts off by talking about setting it up as a project at university in 1968. And he said, at the time he read the Underground Press, but he says, I wasn't a dope-smoking hippie. And this is quite important. So the culture of the Underground Press was really important. And through that, I think he learnt that there were a lot of things out there which weren't being dealt with by the mainstream media. So everything from in fact he claims that they named it fringe theatre to lectures at universities which the public could go to and so on and so forth, and of course kind of pop stuff. Well, we'll listen to this clip.
If you were attached in some way to that kind of alternative underground society and culture, that's not only the only thing that you consumed. I mean, you can't spend your whole life kind of going to listen to Pink Floyd and go to poetry readings and being shouted at it, radical theatre groups driving around the Bend. So you mix in with that kind of good continental films, which were being shown in places like the Paris Pullman and the Academy Cinema and the Everyman Hampstead, and you'd also go and see rock bands, so people like John Mayall, who had Eric Clapton playing at the time, which then moved quite quickly, or Eric Clapton moved very quickly into being Cream, and even Led Zeppelin were kind of starting at the time. I regret to this day that I didn't go and see them playing in the pubs then, because there wasn't. I suppose maybe I was not talking to the right people. Right. Sort of, there wasn't a big buzz about it in a way. But the Rolling Stones, who were world famous at that stage, I mean, they were considered part of the kind of package that was sort of, kind of part of that you bought into.
He talks about then from there how they extended to editorial content about the use of the interview, the feature writers. There's interesting details about how the left had on the paper before the 1981 NUJ strike, and how, for example, they couldn't have a gay section, according to the left, because that was ghettoising homosexuality. After the strike, they could do that. And actually, I think Time Out was a very important part of gay liberation in London. And then, the mistakes, the successes and failures, and missing punk and club culture.
There was a era, certainly in the last sort of from the middle 70s to 81, where some of the magazine reactions and judgments got a bit warped, in the sense that because there were too many rather opinionated people who had very political views of life, who were sort of rather pushing things to the and so we had things like in that period, for example, Time Out failed. Literally completely failed to cover punk properly. It caught up in the end.
But so did most people. Most people, it caught them by surprise, and most of the press reaction was adverse.
But I think the trouble there were two problems. One, the editor at the time was just had his eye off the ball because he didn't see it, and he was more interested in sort of rather, kind of rock bands in pubs. And the other thing that would have happened was that the sort of the sort of articulate lefties would have sort of said, "Oh, we don't want to run about right. Why are we writing about these kind of young bands? And just sort of rather dismissed it." And more importantly, or as importantly, for example, we missed out completely on the birth of club culture with all the Steve Strange's club, what's it called, Heroes and Blitz Kids and all that kind of stuff, which I think started about 78, probably. Which all got rather dismissed as being, by certain of the sort of senior editorial people who were rather left-wing, and as being sort of frivolous, and men wearing makeup, and it was all dismissed.
Now, Paul, you probably know City Limits was set up. When was City Limits?
81, right?
So it's after that strike.
It was an outcome of the strike.
And it was the left-wing people who had basically been pushed out of Time Out.
Some of them, but there was some, and also there were some great writers among them. You've got to think about Cynthia Rose, or those people who came to. City Limits was a great magazine.
Was on
I think it's interesting because I talked to Tony for the exhibition I had about independent magazines at Somerset House in 2018, and he was great. He gave me a day, and we had lunch, then went over to his place, and he gave me a day, and we talked about a lot. And he was telling me about the birth of Time Out, with, of course, Whispering Bob.
Right,
as well.
Of course.
The two of them went
University.
Went into IT. I think they'd been street selling IT. That was the way you kind of got into the underground press as a street seller. Felix Dennis was one for Oz magazine.
That was Felix Dennis' business,
magazine. And so they went in and said, "Hey, look, it's called What's On or something like that. It's got a crappy title.
Oh, yeah, I remember What's On.
Really higgledy-piggledy, badly laid out."
Yeah, it was
and
rubbish.
Mick Farron told me for the book as well, none of them could be asked to do it because they were stoned all the time or just too damn lazy. And here were these two kids who say, "We can sort this out for you," and they basically told them to fuck off. And so those two went, "Okay, all right," and so that's why they did it. And a lot of it sprang from Tony's own interest in, as you said, fringe theatre. He came from a background, I don't know whether his mother was involved in drama or something, but he was very interested in what was happening with the living theatre and all that experimental stuff, and he wasn't seeing that reflected. And so I think it came from that. As to his talk about punk, by 76, and I remember this very well as a Londoner who had read Time Out. Time Out had kind of gone off the boil. It was great for arts coverage. There weren't that many galleries around, but there were great writers like Sarah Kent. But it seemed like a very old-fashioned, it was only 8 years old by that point, very old-fashioned publication to be even engaging with if you were associated with punk. So I think it was a two-way thing.
Yeah.
I don't think the punk bands wanted to be in there.
No.
Because it was read by Longhairs.
Yeah. I remember sitting
and run by long.
Yeah.
Paul just pointed rather pointedly at me.
Never trust a hippie.
I must admit, I found, even though I'm on the left, so
I'm just jealous. By the way.
I'm not on the Trotskyite left, but I found City Limits really refreshing. I mean, because it at a time when Thatcher had just been elected, when the lines were being drawn, the miners' strike
was beginning to bite, wasn't
just
it?
round the corner.
Yeah.
And City Limits spoke to that and made a time out, just simply didn't.
Yeah, no, it was great. Let's not forget Event as well. Richard Branson's entry into the market.
I had forgotten.
Me too.
I still have a copy with Madness where they had a flexi disc on the cover. It was for Take It or Leave It, their album, their film. 1980.
Worth a lot of money now, Paul.
It's interesting, the story of the music... Yeah, it must be 20p or something. But it's interesting, the story of the music press, there are all these people trying to get in there all the time. Branson repeatedly, starting with Student out of the underground press, but then also New Music News, which was Felix Dennis's... You talked about the strike. It's 1980.
That was the strike breaking.
There was one in 1980 as well as 81. Yeah. And so he leapt in there knowing that for a period he could suck up all the advertising.
Yeah.
And so he was constantly trying to get in on the music press, and of course he did later on with Blender in the 90s.
I mean, it was Kung Fu magazines which made
his money. Bruce Lee.
He was a hell of a character.
Yeah,
I remember going to meet him with Matt Snow, and you never forgot that experience.
If you read the transcripts from the Oz trial, the judge, this awful judge who sent them down, sneered at him, saying, "Oh, the other two are sort of,
you'll never come to anything.
Middle class and educated,
exactly. Yes. You'll never come to anything."
Just annoyed,
And he's the one who went on to make millions.
Own his own island.
Listen, we're coming to the end of the time that we have to talk about your fantastic, comprehensive, definitive book, Paul. It's really been wonderful speaking with you.
And we could talk about this
all day. This could be a week-long podcast. People bringing in refreshments.
With occasional break for lunch.
But I would just say to any listeners who found any of this remotely interesting, do go and buy Paul's book, Totally Wired, The Rise and Fall of the Music Press. I learnt so much from it. And also enjoyed it so much. So it's extraordinary characters in there.
But that was one of the attractions. Yes. There's a bunch of great stories in there, quite funny, and sometimes dark as well.
Yes. And there are lots of good illustrations in it as well, which are nicely kind of interwoven into it.
They're all from my collection as well.
Yeah, cool.
And so there are
really
some... Cool. It's a bit random, really. So there are some things that are missing, but I thought, let's just use my stuff. And some of it is quite used as well, but I think that adds to it.
Yeah, you definitely get a sense of them as physical objects.
Yeah, that was the idea.
Nice. Really.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly. Great. I'm glad you responded to that.
It remains for us to say goodbye to a couple of notable figures who've passed away in the last couple of weeks, starting, of course, with Christine McVie. I was rather shocked.
Yeah, it was quite
when
shocking.
I heard that she had died. I don't know, Paul, did you know that she was sick?
No, not at all. But it's very, very sad, isn't it?
I think Stevie Nicks apparently didn't know 3 days before that Christine was in hospital.
Though subsequently one has learned that actually she had been in fairly poor health for quite a while.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know. And what's nice is we don't know because she didn't put stuff out there.
Well, she was quite a private person,
very
wasn't
private
she?
Person.
Yeah.
Which is kind of dignified. I always thought she was very dignified. Given the stories around, she probably emerges from that
dignified,
with the most
even though she went out with Dennis Wilson.
Well, I know. To retain one's dignity whilst having a relationship with Dennis Wilson must have been very hard. I mean, what I find really interesting about her is that she was one of the first people drafted into that band after the great guitarists left. After Peter Green and Danny Cohen and Jeremy Spencer.
You don't get the sense she was daunted, right?
Well, first of all, the band was wreckage at that point. Yeah. They had an ex-manager who put out a completely fake version of Fleetwood Mac
on the road.
So they were kind of literally on their uppers, and she's hung in there through the Bob Welch iteration and so on and so forth. So we're like 2 or 3 before Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks sort of turned up.
Yes,
and also because I'm not a great reader of writing credits, I didn't realise how many of the really big songs.
It's amazing,
were hers.
Isn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's just astonishing. I mean, some of the biggest hits they had are from Rumours, from Fleetwood Mac, and then Rumours.
Tango in the Night. I mean, I loved her pop song. I think she was a great pop songwriter. None of that kind of witchy woman Californian ethereal.
Oh, right.
She just wrote these great fucking pop songs. Everywhere.
Yeah.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
And, so in many ways, she was the heart and soul of that band. There were like kind of more visible faces at front of the stage, and she'd be tucked away to one side behind the keyboard. But I think in some ways she really was beating heart of that band.
really love that story about her retiring, essentially.
Yes,
she must have been quite young. I mean, I think 60 is quite young.
Yeah.
She must have been around that age, maybe even less. And, moving to the country...
Yeah.
And then after 10 years going, this is driving me mad. Can I come back in?
Yeah.
Yes,
that's kind of great as well, isn't it?
We've got this wonderful 1977 audio interview with Fleetwood Mac by the late John Pidgeon. So I thought I'd just pick out the bits where Christine's, with just 2 short clips of Christine speaking. In 1977, they're already like, the reinvention of Fleetwood Mac has already happened, because the first Fleetwood Mac album, 1975, that album with Buckingham and Nicks has come out, and Rumours is just out, but at this point we have no idea how massive it's going to be.
Just the whole visual part of the band changed radically, I think, with Stevie and Lindsay joining, because we then seemed to become a very unified 5 members, with all still happening to remain our individual selves, which is very interesting. I mean, I've never seen us obviously from out front, but I can imagine that it must be quite an interesting show to watch. And obviously musically, it's very versatile. The band is very versatile now. We haven't even started to explore the musical realms, musical possibilities that, amongst the 5 of us, there's endless permutation.
I think it's a really important point to make about that Fleetwood Mac. The fact that there were these 2 really strong female presences on stage, songwriting. It was such a change from just the sort of macho 4-piece rock band guitar thing.
But it's interesting that she picks up or talks about the visual impact. Because, of course, she'd been to, I think it's Birmingham School of Art.
That's right.
She graduated as a sculptor.
Yeah.
And then she worked in Dickens & Jones as a window dresser. I'm always interested in those people who came out of the great art school, as you did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The great art school explosion. And there is some understanding that here was somebody who understood visuals, who understood how you kind of align yourselves, and maybe she tutored the others, or maybe she instinctively did it. But certainly the visual impact of Fleetwood Mac on her arrival was just heightened, wasn't it?
I mean,
very good point.
I love the fact that her real surname was Perfect. That her and she said it was awful. She'd go to school and the teacher would say, "Well, let's see how perfect you really are."
But also, I think she had a great voice, actually.
Yeah.
I sort of, compared to, say, Stevie Nicks' voice, it's a more sort of almost like in the background voice. It's not right out there. But then you think about, she sang that version of I'd Rather Go Blind, didn't she? Chicken Chat.
Which
bluesy, soulful
Rod's
voice.
version. Rod's version is very much Christine Perfect's version.
Yes.
Rather than, is it Etta James? Or
Etta James, yeah. So the second clip addresses Rumours itself.
I'd always thought, every time we finish an album, from the word go, since I've been with Fleetwood Mac, I think this is the one. This is the one. I got a feeling, with Mystery to Me, I felt it very strongly. I thought this is going to be the one. It's going to, and then I felt myself thinking the same thing again with the White Album, But I knew it was different. I just knew it was, and we all had such a lot of faith when Mick was talking about, the 3-week preliminaries that we did to just to try and work ourselves in as a band on the stage, because we'd never played before live to an audience. It proved itself to us at that point that, you know, we had a very special thing to offer.
So it's goodbye to Christine McVie, very sad. And we also, just in the last few days, lost the legendary Jim Stewart of Stax Records, the co-founder of Stax Records.
We were staggered that he was still alive, weren't we?
We were slightly surprised. One of those people who you just somehow thought, well, yeah, he must have died a few years ago.
In Stax, isn't he?
He is the Sturt, and Estelle Axton, his sister, is the Axe. Right. And we do have an audio interview with Estelle on the site where she talks about Jim and how they... I mean, you know, it is one of the great stories of Southern Soul, isn't it? That there's these siblings who grew up in a tiny little white town in Tennessee, no black people around at all, Estelle says in that audio interview. And Jim is like a country fiddler. And... you know, long story short, they end up taking over this old cinema on East Macklemore Avenue in the heart of Black Memphis. And Estelle runs the record shop. And I mean, it's
Is she related to Hoyt?
No.
No. I was wondering whether that was a stretch.
She really deserves herself to be given a lot more attention than she gets, because everyone talks about it's his label. It was her running the shop outside the front of it. She started noticing what the black kids, because it was based in a black neighbourhood, what the black kids were buying.
Oh, they were selling records out.
It was a record shop. It was a studio, which was the recording like Howlin' Wolf and so on and so forth. You know, but she noticed what the local black kids were buying, and she basically became the A&R person. You know, to a great extent. You know. But anyway, you know, I mean, and then who did they sell out to? It wasn't like Holiday Inn or something. They sold out to some sort of...
Stax was bought by someone like Polygram, wasn't it?
It wasn't a record label at first. It was a business.
Oh, it was. Sorry, I beg your pardon. It was it Paramount or Gulf and Western?
Something like
that. Yeah. My memory is failing.
But you know what this does? This squares a circle in terms of the music press, because Stax sponsored the 1973 Rock Critics Convention.
That's right.
To promote their new bands.
That was the Al Bell Stax, wasn't it?
On Ardent. So I think Big Star played, and there's a British band whose name I've always known.
Stray? Stray?
Could be Stray.
I mean, I will mention...
Who played that thing.
I will mention...
That's wild.
I actually wrote this 4,500 word oral history of the Rock Critics Convention and got quotes out of everyone from Cameron Crowe to Jan Jahelski, and we are featuring that in the long read on the homepage this week. It is pretty hilarious, I have to say. I mean, but there's antics they got.
There's some pretty reprehensible behaviour.
There's some terrible behaviour.
I should hope so.
There's some terrible behaviour. But Mark, tell us about some of the pieces you've added.
I mentioned earlier Marianne Faithfull. This is the very earliest Marianne Faithfull piece we've got.
Oh, is it? Wow.
Library, 1964, Evening Standard. So Maureen Cleave was writing about her in Evening Standard before the music press was writing about her. And she says, her mother, who's Austro-Hungarian and whose command of the English language is not total, was for some time under the impression that her daughter was singing As Queers Go By. Her great-great-uncle on her mother's side was Baron Leopold Sacher-Masoch, from whose name derives the word masochism. Our family skeleton, said Miss Faithfull with some pride. She would really have preferred to own Dessard. I just love it. Anyway,
that sounds like Andrew Lou Oldham at work.
Definitely the hand of the Lou somewhere.
But that's Maureen Cleave's writing. Whoever she is. Alexis Korner, being interviewed by Roy Carr, Enemy in 1970. The runtime was CCS. Well, I had the misfortune to see at the Albert Hall.
Right. They had a big hit.
That version, a whole lot of love.
I'll tell you why, because they couldn't sell out, and so Alexis gave his sons, who I was at school with, just loads and loads of tickets. Right. So we all went. Al Cooper went up and played with them, oddly enough. It's very, very peculiar, really dreadful gig. Anyway, he says, I've always been a fan of the Stones. They're the best British blues band ever, playing their own brand of belly button to kneecap music. I should really have said that in an even posher and deeper voice. Larry Hurd, house music man, to Jeff Lorez and Blues and Soul 1992. He says, People come to Chicago thinking it's this big house music mecca, and house music be playing when they arrive at the airport. I know people who have arrived at the airport and asked where they could go hear some house music, and people have walked away from them, almost signaling a cross in their face. A really great, I won't read anything from it, it's really fantastic Richard Goldstein piece this week about Ravi Shankar, and he skewers the sort of the idiocy that surrounds it. Below this one, I like this paragraph. It's, during his concerts, Philharmonic Hall brimmed with the face of sought-after Satori. Seated on an Indian carpet and surrounded with wafting incense, Ravi Shankar made love to this weird giraffe of an instrument they call a sitar. He stroked and petted it and made it groan whine. He tickled its belly and rubbed its back. His bare feet, knotted at rest, kept the rhythm. I rather love that. A couple of little short ones. Deep Purple's Richie Blackmore by Richard Green. Talking about working with Screaming Lord Sutch. Of course, he's in Sutch's band. Sutch taught me a hell of a lot about showmanship. Nothing about musicianship. But how to leap off stage and burn amps and run around in leopard skin.
Vital lessons.
Vital lessons. Brian Ferry being interviewed by Dave Marsh in Newsday in 1975. Said, when I'm at home, away from all this, I probably lead what might be considered a very decadent life. But that doesn't mean I have a 7-year-old boys chained to my radiator.
Oh my God.
And lastly, I think, Barney, you quite like this, Pat Benatar, interviewed by Pete McCuskey in Sounds 81, says, at first I used to be nervous. Now I could fart on stage and they would just scream. That's my lot.
Hit me with your best shot. The great Pat Benatar.
Jasper.
Just two things to mention briefly. First of which is Odd Future Wolfgang Kill Them All, the OF Tape Volume 2. Yeah, well, I think there's a reason why they usually go by just Odd Future. They're a kind of collective of, Tyler the Creator and Earl Sweatshirt and later Frank Ocean as well. And it's a review by Paul Lester on the BBC website of their they released a ton of mixtapes, and this was a sort of official release, the OF Tape Volume 2. And he says, Tyler and Left Brain's skills as producers are peerless, even if their NERD adoration, to match their Waka-Flocka Flame worship, reaches new heights on tracks such as Analog 2 and You Know. Luscious funk muzak, so prettily breezy you can't believe they're not Pharrell Williams covers, equal parts sick and slick.
Lummy.
The form features a disclaimer from Tyler reminding listeners not to underestimate the self-lacerating aspect of his art, just in case you thought this was another misogynist's charter masquerading as a slow jam. Which is interesting because Tyler the Creator is I think, an amazing rapper and musician, but has been kind of marred with some controversy for various lyrics, and I think he might even have been banned briefly from entering the UK by one of our previous Home Secretaries. But so it's just an interesting review.
How many have we had of those? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That was the... I couldn't remember which. But yeah, it's an interesting review, and I think Odd Future are a really interesting group and had a massive, massive impact from that kind of... This is 2012, from that time forward, on the sound of modern pop, which I think is cool. And then Billie Eilish, interviewed by Jude Rogers in The Guardian in December 2021, so just a year ago, and she's just releasing her second album at this point, and it's also when she's been on the cover of British Vogue, basically doing a kind of Marilyn Monroe cosplay, essentially. Eilish posted her Marilyn-styled UK Vogue cover on Instagram in May. It got 1 million likes in less than 6 minutes, her second record-breaking feat on the platform. Proof that money can make you change your values and sell out, railed a Daily Mail headline. It was so much fun, that shoot, Eilish says today. It was playing dress-up, because her voice hardens against the haters. That's what a fucking photo shoot is.
Yeah, good.
I just love Billie. I think she's fantastic, and I think that all that criticism of that was just like, oh, come on. You just let her kind of explore stuff.
It's kind of manufactured, isn't it? I mean, as criticism goes, it's just like everything.
Exactly. Well, anyway, Billie's great. We love Billie, so I wanted to end on her.
That's brilliant. I mean, it just makes me think that as long as there are stars like Frank Ocean and Billie Eilish around, pop music matters, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. And it's also, riling the right people. Yes. If they're upset, you're doing something right.
Yeah, but it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
It's quite easy.
I was really glad to see that on my Spotify festival, Printback Fest lineup, that Lizzo supported Jimi Hendrix.
That'd be a hell of a day.
That's a wild...
Well, enjoy that gig when you get to the pearly gate.
The next night, my band's bottom of the bill to Miles Davis. So
Did you get to jam with Miles?
And the Grateful Dead were on there.
And the Dead. I was on stage with Miles and the Grateful Dead. Wonderful. Well, listen, it's time to finish. Do visit Rock's Back Pages, where
Fantastic
subscribers can read over 50,000 articles and over 800 audio interviews. Check to see if your local library subscribes to RBP, and if not, maybe suggest they take a free trial of the world's largest archive of music journalism.
Hurrah.
Many thanks to our guest, Mr. Paul Gorman.
Oh, it's been great. Been great. Really
Thank you
enjoyed
for joining
it.
us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a lot of
It's been
fun.
great to be here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul.
That concludes episode 142 of the Rock's Back Pages podcast. Many thanks to special guest Paul Gorman. Totally Wired is published by Thames and Hudson and available now from all good bookshops. Visit Paul's website at paulgormanis.com and follow him on Instagram at _Paul_Gorman_. The hosts are Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper, Murison and Bowie. The Rock's Back Pages podcast is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com.
Love when it comes without a warning, 'cause waiting for it gets so boring. A lot can change in 20 seconds. A lot can happen in the dark. Love when it makes you lose your bearings. Some information's not for sharing.